They laughed at the way she spoke before they ever looked at the tears hiding in her eyes. The sound of crystal glasses clinking beneath the chandeliers almost drowned out the laughter at first. But Zaria Brooks heard every word as she stood frozen beside table 12, holding a silver tray against trembling hands. No, no, say it again. The woman in the emerald gown laughed, leaning back in her velvet chair while the diamonds around her neck caught the golden ballroom lights. The way you said Bordeaux, that accent is adorable. More laughter followed instantly. Rich people laughing the way they always did when they forgot someone serving them was still human. Zaria forced a smile, even though her throat tightened painfully. "I apologize, ma'am," she said softly, her Louisiana accent curling around every word, no matter how hard she tried to hide it. She had spent 2 years watching YouTube pronunciation videos after midnight shifts, repeating words into cracked bathroom mirrors, trying to flatten every trace of where she came from. But exhaustion always brought the accent back. And tonight she was exhausted. The charity gala inside the Castellano Grand Hotel looked like another universe entirely. All marble floors and candlelight and gowns that probably cost more than the tiny apartment she shared with her younger brother in Queens. Every table glittered with gold-rimmed glasses and imported roses flown in from Europe that morning. Even the air smelled expensive, a mixture of perfume, whiskey, and polished wood. Zaria felt painfully out of place, moving between those tables in her black server uniform with sore feet hidden inside discount heels that pinched her toes raw after 10-hour shifts. "Where are you from?" Another guest asked loudly, already grinning before she answered. "Louisiana, sir." "Oh, I knew it." He laughed. "You sound straight out of the bayou." The table erupted again. Someone actually slapped the table laughing, while another guest lifted a phone halfway, preparing to record. Zaria's stomach twisted. Her mother used to tell her that people only mocked what they secretly feared they could never understand. But tonight, those words felt very far away. She lowered her eyes and carefully poured wine into another crystal glass, praying her shaking hands wouldn't betray her. Across the ballroom, hidden beneath the glow of chandeliers and political speeches, Adrian Castellano sat silently at the head of the longest table in the room. Most people avoided looking directly at him for too long. It wasn't just the tailored black suit or the bodyguards standing several feet behind him. It was the stillness. Adrian carried silence the way other men carried weapons. Dangerous, controlled, final. At 38 years old. Adrian Castellano had built an empire powerful enough to make governors shake his hand and billionaires wait for his approval. Yet he barely touched the steak sitting untouched on his plate. His cold blue eyes drifted across the ballroom without expression until laughter from table 12 cut through the music again. "Come on." The woman in green smirked at Zaria. "Say the wine name one more time for us." Zaria felt heat rise into her cheeks as nearby tables began turning toward her now too. The humiliation spread slowly through the ballroom like smoke. "Please excuse me," she whispered quietly. But before she could step away, the man holding the phone chuckled. "Nah, let her talk. This is better than the entertainment they hired." A few people laughed harder. One woman covered her mouth pretending to hide it. Another mimicked Zaria's accent under her breath. And then, from the center table near the ballroom windows overlooking Manhattan, came the soft sound of a glass being placed carefully onto marble. Adrian Castellano had finally looked up. The ballroom slowly changed without anyone understanding why. Conversations faded one table at a time as Adrian Castellano leaned back in his chair, his cold eyes fixed entirely on Zaria Brooks. Even the violinists near the marble staircase seemed quieter now, their music swallowed by a tension too heavy for sound. The woman in the emerald gown noticed it first. Her smile faltered slightly as she glanced toward Adrian's table. "Oh, relax," she laughed nervously, trying to recover the mood. "We are only joking around." But nobody joined her this time. Adrian's fingers rested against the crystal glass beside him, perfectly still, That was what unsettled people most about him. He never raised his voice, never rushed. Men who spent their lives chasing power usually filled rooms with noise, but Adrian Castellano controlled rooms through silence alone. Zaria felt it immediately. The laughter had stopped. Yet somehow, the humiliation felt even heavier now, because every eye in the ballroom had shifted between her and the man watching her. Her chest tightened painfully. She just wanted to disappear. "Sir, your wine," she whispered softly to an older guest nearby, trying desperately to continue working as if nothing had happened. The guest took the glass without looking at her. Nobody wanted attention anymore, not with Adrian watching. One of the younger businessmen forced out a chuckle and leaned back in his chair. "I mean, come on," he said, attempting confidence. "If people work in luxury hospitality, they should know how to speak professionally." Zaria lowered her eyes again. That sentence hurt worse than the laughter, because deep down, part of her feared he was right. 2 years earlier, a hotel manager in Atlanta had rejected her after a job interview and smiled politely while saying, "You are very sweet. But our guests expect a more refined presentation." She had cried in the bus station bathroom afterward, listening to recordings online, trying to reshape her voice into something people respected. Softer vowels, flatter consonants, less Louisiana, less her. Adrian suddenly stood from his chair. The movement was calm, controlled, almost graceful, yet the entire ballroom stiffened instantly. Bodyguards near the walls straightened subtly. A senator halfway through a conversation stopped speaking mid-sentence. Adrian adjusted the cuff of his black suit slowly before beginning to walk across the ballroom floor. The polished marble reflected the chandelier light beneath his expensive Italian shoes as he moved toward table 12 without saying a word. Zaria's pulse hammered painfully against her ribs. Up close, Adrian looked even more intimidating than the newspapers described. Tall, broad-shouldered, sharp jawline touched with faint stubble, pale blue eyes cold enough to freeze confidence out of anyone who met them too long. The emerald gown woman forced another smile. "Mr. Castellano, we were only having a little fun." Adrian looked at her for 3 silent seconds. Then his gaze shifted toward the phone, still sitting loosely in the businessman's hand. "Delete it," Adrian said quietly. The man blinked. "Excuse me." Adrian's expression never changed. "The video. Delete it now." The businessman quickly fumbled with the phone. Of course. Absolutely. Around them, nobody dared move. Zaria stood frozen, holding the silver tray so tightly her fingers ached. Adrian finally turned toward her. Then, and for the first time that night, somebody looked at her without amusement or pity. He studied her face carefully, the trembling hands, the exhaustion behind her eyes, the quiet humiliation she was trying so hard to survive with dignity. Then Adrian spoke again. His voice low and controlled. "What part of Louisiana are you from?" The question caught her completely off guard. "Baton Rouge, sir," she answered softly. Something flickered behind Adrian's cold eyes so quickly most people would have missed it entirely. Pain, memory, recognition. And suddenly the terrifying man standing in front of her no longer looked angry. He looked haunted. For a moment, the ballroom no longer existed for Adrian Castellano. Not the politicians waiting for his attention, not the $1 million donations being whispered across candlelit tables, not the orchestra playing softly beneath the chandeliers. All he heard was that voice, Baton Rouge. The words landed somewhere deep inside him, like an old song he had spent 20 years trying to forget. Zaria noticed the subtle change in his expression immediately. The coldness in his eyes did not disappear. But something underneath it cracked slightly. Human, fragile, dangerous in a completely different way. Adrian studied her face carefully, as if searching for a memory hidden inside someone else's features. "How long have you lived in New York?" he asked quietly. Zaria swallowed hard before answering. "Almost 3 years, sir." And before that, Louisiana. Her voice softened further. Mostly Baton Rouge, a little outside the city. The emerald gown woman shifted awkwardly in her chair. Nobody at the table understood why Adrian was asking questions instead of leaving. The silence had stretched too long now, heavy, suffocating. Finally, the businessman who had recorded Zaria forced a nervous laugh. I mean, honestly, Adrian, nobody meant anything by it. People are too sensitive these days. Adrian slowly turned towards him. The businessman immediately stopped smiling. Adrian did not raise his voice. That somehow made the moment worse. Do you know what my mother sounded like? Adrian asked calmly. Nobody answered. The ballroom around them had become eerily still now. Nearby conversations had completely died. Even servers across the room had slowed their movements, sensing tension spreading through the marble ballroom like a storm rolling over water. Adrian slipped one hand into his pocket and looked toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan, glowing beneath the night sky. When I was 11 years old, he said quietly, my mother cleaned rooms at a hotel in New Orleans 14 hours a day. His voice remained calm, controlled, but every word carried weight sharp enough to cut through the silence. Rich men used to laugh at the way she spoke too. Zaria felt her breath catch slightly. Adrian's eyes stayed fixed on the skyline, as if he was no longer seeing New York at all. I remember standing beside her one afternoon while she tried to pronounce the name of a French wine exactly the way a guest demanded. A faint, bitter smile touched his mouth for less than a second. She practiced that word for weeks afterward because she thought maybe sounding different would make people respect her. The emerald gown woman lowered her eyes toward the table. The businessman looked visibly uncomfortable now. Adrian finally turned back toward them. Do you know what I learned watching her? Nobody spoke. Cruel people always mistake kindness for weakness. His pale blue eyes shifted briefly toward Zaria again. And insecure people mock what reminds them that dignity cannot be bought. The words settled across the ballroom with terrifying quiet. Zaria felt tears threatening behind her eyes. But she forced herself not to cry. Not here, not in front of these people. Adrian noticed anyway. He noticed everything. The businessman cleared his throat awkwardly. Look, if she was offended, I can apologize. Adrian stared at him for a long moment before answering, no. The single word froze the man instantly. Adrian stepped slightly closer, his voice calm enough to make the room hold its breath again. You will not apologize because she was offended. His eyes darkened faintly. You will apologize because you forgot she was human. Nobody moved, nobody dared speak. And standing there beneath the chandelier light, with humiliation still burning in her chest, Zaria suddenly realized the most feared man in New York was not defending her out of pity. He was defending the memory of someone he had never stopped loving. The silence after Adrian Castellano's words felt heavier than the marble walls surrounding the ballroom. Nobody at table 12 seemed capable of breathing normally anymore. The businessman who had mocked Zaria stared down at his untouched whiskey glass, while the woman in the emerald gown adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist with trembling fingers. Humiliation had changed sides now. Zaria could feel it moving through the room like cold air. Yet somehow, that did not make her feel victorious, only overwhelmed. Adrian remained standing beside her, calm and unreadable beneath the chandelier light. His presence no longer felt like anger alone, it felt personal, deeply personal. Apologize to her, Adrian said quietly. The businessman swallowed hard. Miss Brooks, I am sorry if what I said came across disrespectful. Adrian's expression darkened slightly. Look at her. The man slowly raised his eyes towards Zaria for the first time all evening. It shocked her how difficult that simple act seemed for him now. I am sorry, he repeated more sincerely. What I said was wrong. The woman in emerald quickly followed. I apologize too. Zaria nodded faintly, unsure what to do with any of this. Her heart still pounded painfully beneath her uniform. Moments ago these people had laughed at her like she was entertainment. Now they looked afraid to even speak too loudly around her. Adrian finally stepped back from the table. Around the ballroom, conversations slowly began returning in hushed whispers. But the atmosphere had changed completely. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody recorded videos. Several guests avoided looking toward table 12 entirely. Adrian glanced once toward his security detail near the ballroom entrance before turning back toward Zaria. "Walk with me," he said calmly. Her eyes widened slightly. "So you have been on your feet all night." His tone softened just enough to surprise her. "You need air." Every instinct told Zaria to refuse. Men like Adrian Castellano existed in newspaper headlines and whispered conversations, not in the life of a woman working double shifts to pay overdue rent, but something in his voice made refusal impossible. Adrian began walking toward the massive glass doors leading onto the private rooftop terrace overlooking Manhattan. Zaria followed carefully several steps behind him, painfully aware of dozens of eyes tracking them across the ballroom floor. Outside, the cool October air wrapped around her skin instantly. The sounds of the gala became muffled behind the glass doors as city lights stretched endlessly across the Manhattan skyline below them. Yellow taxis crawled through the streets nearly 40 stories beneath the terrace, while cold wind stirred the loose curls near Zaria's face. Adrian rested one hand lightly against the stone railing overlooking the city. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Zaria stood awkwardly near the doorway, holding her silver tray against her chest like armor. Finally, Adrian spoke without looking at her. "My mother hated charity galas." Zaria blinked softly, surprised by the sudden confession. Adrian gave the faintest hint of a smile, sad more than amused. She used to say, wealthy people only donated money after they ran out of kindness. Zaria lowered her eyes slightly. "She sounds smart." Adrian looked out across the skyline again. "She was." His voice grew quieter now, more distant. "When I was 14, she came home crying after a man at a hotel mocked her accent in front of an entire dining room." Zaria's chest tightened painfully. Adrian exhaled slowly into the cold night air. "That was the first time I ever realized humiliation could follow someone home." The city lights reflected faintly in his pale blue eyes as he turned toward her again. "Tonight, when they laughed at you." He paused briefly. For a second, I heard her voice all over again. Zaria felt emotion rise sharply in her throat. Not pity, something heavier. Because standing beneath the Manhattan skyline beside the most feared man in New York, she suddenly realized his silence carried grief the same way hers carried exhaustion. Quietly, constantly, like something neither of them ever truly escaped. The wind high above Manhattan carried the faint scent of rain as Zaria stood quietly beside Adrian Castellano on the rooftop terrace, still trying to understand how her entire night had transformed in less than 20 minutes. Earlier, she had been nothing more than background noise to the people inside that ballroom, a waitress with the wrong accent and tired eyes. Now the most powerful man in the building was speaking to her like she mattered. Somehow that frightened her more than the humiliation had. Adrian remained facing the skyline, one hand resting loosely against the stone railing while the lights of New York flickered beneath him like restless stars. Up close, the sharp edges of his reputation seemed less clear. The newspapers always described him as cold, ruthless, untouchable. But standing beside him now, Zaria noticed something else beneath the expensive suit and controlled expression: exhaustion. The kind that settled deep into a person after carrying too many memories for too long. "You do not have to hide your voice," Adrian said suddenly. Zaria looked down at the silver tray in her hands. "Easy for you to say." Adrian glanced toward her. "No," he answered quietly. "It is not." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She hesitated before speaking again. "When people hear me talk, they already decide who I am before I even finish a sentence. Adrian nodded once, as if he understood that feeling too well. People hear what they expect to hear. His pale blue eyes drifted toward the city again. A poor woman's accent sounds uneducated to them. A wealthy man with the same accent suddenly sounds authentic. Zaria felt a small bitter smile tug at her lips because he was right. She remembered customers at restaurants complimenting southern accents when celebrities used them on television while mocking women like her for sounding country in real life. Adrian noticed the faint smile immediately. "There it is," he said softly. "What the expression you had before they embarrassed you." Zaria's smile faded again. "I do not think that girl came back yet." Adrian studied her quietly for several seconds. "She will..." The certainty in his voice unsettled her more than if he had offered sympathy. A cold gust of wind swept across the rooftop terrace, lifting loose curls near her cheeks. Instinctively, Zaria rubbed her hands together for warmth, without a word. Adrian removed his charcoal suit jacket and held it toward her. Her eyes widened slightly. "Sir, I cannot take that. You are freezing. I am fine." Adrian raised one eyebrow faintly. That was not a request. The corner of Zaria's mouth twitched before she carefully accepted the jacket. The expensive fabric carried traces of cedar cologne and winter air, warm from his body heat. It felt absurdly heavy around her shoulders, like wearing something that belonged to another world entirely. Adrian watched her pull the jacket closed quietly before speaking again. "Why New York?" Zaria exhaled softly. "My little brother earned a scholarship at Columbia." A flicker of surprise crossed Adrian's face. Impressive. Pride softened her expression for the first time all night. "He is smarter than me." Adrian looked at her carefully. "I doubt that." She laughed quietly under her breath, almost involuntarily, and the sound seemed to catch him off guard, not because it was loud, but because it was genuine. For the first time that evening, the tension between them shifted slightly. Less fear, more understanding. But before either of them could speak again, the rooftop doors suddenly opened behind them. One of Adrian's security men stepped outside, looking unusually tense. "Sir," he said carefully, "there is someone downstairs demanding to speak with Miss Brooks." Zaria frowned immediately. "Me." The bodyguard nodded once. "He says he knows you from Louisiana." Adrian's expression hardened instantly. "What is his name?" The bodyguard hesitated. "Marcus Reed." The color drained from Zaria's face so quickly, Adrian noticed it immediately. And in that moment, he realized whatever fear he had pulled her away from inside the ballroom tonight was nothing compared to the fear attached to that name. Zaria's fingers tightened around Adrian Castellano's jacket so suddenly that the expensive fabric wrinkled beneath her grip. The color had completely drained from her face now, leaving her standing pale beneath the rooftop lights while cold October wind moved softly through her curls. Adrian noticed every detail instantly. The fear in her eyes was different from the humiliation earlier downstairs. This fear ran deeper, older, personal. "Who is Marcus Reed?" Adrian asked quietly. Zaria looked toward the rooftop doors as if expecting the man to appear at any second. "I thought he was still in Louisiana," she whispered. Adrian's expression hardened slightly. "That does not answer my question." Zaria swallowed hard before finally speaking. "He used to work with my mother." The hesitation in her voice told Adrian there was far more to the story. His security man remained near the doorway waiting silently for instructions while city lights flickered across the rooftop terrace around them. "Did he threaten you?" Adrian asked. Zaria quickly shook her head. "No, not exactly." The uncertainty in her answer bothered him immediately. Adrian spent his life reading people. Fear rarely lied. "Then why do you look terrified?" Zaria lowered her eyes toward the skyline below. For several long seconds, she said nothing at all. Finally, she exhaled slowly. "Because Marcus Reed only shows up when something bad has happened." The wind carried the distant sounds of traffic nearly 40 stories beneath them while Adrian watched her carefully. He could see the conflict in her face now. Part of her wanted to explain. Another part clearly regretted saying anything at all. 3 years ago, Zaria began softly. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families outside Baton Rouge. Adrian listened without interrupting. One of those families accused her of stealing jewelry after a charity event. Shame darkened her expression. She did not take anything, but nobody believed her. Adrian's jaw tightened faintly. He already knew how stories like this usually ended. Marcus was the only person who defended her publicly. Zaria continued. He worked maintenance for the family at the time. He told everyone my mother was innocent. Adrian noticed the subtle tremor in her voice. Was she? Zaria looked at him sharply, hurt flashing across her face before she answered. Yes. Adrian nodded once. I believe you. The words seemed to catch her off guard completely, almost like she was unused to hearing them. 2 weeks later, she continued quietly. They found the missing jewelry in the daughter's own car. Adrian's eyes darkened slightly, and nobody apologized. Zaria laughed softly under her breath, but there was no humor in the sound. No. They just acted uncomfortable for a while and pretended it never happened. Adrian looked away toward the city again, because suddenly he was remembering his own mother standing silently in a hotel kitchen, while wealthy guests avoided her eyes after falsely accusing her of breaking an expensive watch. Nobody apologized then either. The powerful rarely admitted when they were wrong. The rooftop doors opened again before either of them could speak further. The security man stepped forward carefully. Sir, he is becoming impatient downstairs. Adrian's expression cooled instantly back into something unreadable. Did he say what he wants? Only that he needs to speak with Miss Brooks immediately? Zaria looked visibly shaken now. I should go talk to him. Adrian turned toward her slowly. Absolutely not. The firmness in his voice startled her. Sir, this does not involve you. Adrian gave her a long, quiet look. You stopped being invisible to me the moment they laughed at you downstairs. The words landed harder than either of them expected. Zaria looked away first. Adrian stepped closer, his voice lowering slightly. Tell me the truth. Are you in trouble? Zaria hesitated too long before answering, and that silence told Adrian everything he needed to know. His pale blue eyes hardened instantly as pieces began fitting together in his mind. The fear, the exhaustion. The way she constantly apologized even when she had done nothing wrong. Adrian glanced once toward his security man near the doorway. Bring Marcus Reed upstairs, he said calmly. Zaria's eyes widened in panic. No, please do not do that. Adrian looked back at her carefully. Why, for the first time since he met her that night, Zaria Brooks looked completely defenseless. Because if Marcus found me here, she whispered shakily, then it means somebody else finally did too. The rooftop terrace suddenly felt colder after Zaria's confession. Adrian Castellano stood motionless beside her, but the atmosphere around him changed instantly. The softness that had briefly surfaced while speaking about his mother disappeared beneath something sharper now. Focus, calculation, protection. Who found you? He asked quietly. Zaria wrapped his jacket tighter around herself as wind swept across the Manhattan skyline behind them. Her eyes remained fixed on the city below instead of him. I do not know for sure, she admitted softly. But after what happened to my mother, there were people in Louisiana who blamed Marcus for exposing the truth. Adrian listened carefully. Why would that involve you? Zaria hesitated before answering. Because my mother died 6 months later. Adrian's expression darkened immediately. The grief in her voice was too heavy to fake. Car accident, she continued quietly. At least that is what the police report said. Adrian noticed the way her hands trembled slightly against the sleeves of his jacket. You do not believe that. Zaria finally looked at him then, and the pain in her eyes hit him harder than he expected. The brakes failed 2 days after she threatened to sue the family who accused her. The city noise below suddenly seemed very far away. Adrian remained silent for several long seconds, but inside him, something cold began shifting into place. He knew powerful families like that, wealthy enough to bury mistakes beneath lawyers and silence. Marcus helped me leave Louisiana after the funeral, Zaria explained. He said New York was the only place big enough for me to disappear. Adrian studied her carefully now. Every piece finally started connecting. The constant exhaustion, the fear behind her politeness, the way she instinctively tried to shrink herself whenever attention turned toward her. Zaria Brooks had not come to New York chasing dreams. She came here hiding. And tonight Adrian asked, "Why would Marcus suddenly appear now?" Zaria shook her head faintly. "That is what scares me." Before Adrian could answer, the rooftop doors opened once more. This time Marcus Reed himself stepped onto the terrace. Zaria immediately stiffened beside Adrian. Marcus looked to be in his late 40s, broad-shouldered with tired eyes and traces of grey beginning to spread through his beard. His dark coat carried rain droplets from outside, and concern was written all over his face the second he spotted Zaria. "Thank God," he exhaled. "I have been trying to reach you for 3 days." Adrian stepped subtly closer to Zaria before speaking. "You found her anyway?" Marcus's eyes shifted toward Adrian carefully. Recognition flashed there instantly. Everyone in New York recognized Adrian Castellano eventually. "Mr. Castellano," Marcus said cautiously. Adrian's expression remained unreadable. "You frightened her." Marcus looked back toward Zaria with visible guilt. "I did not have a choice." "What happened?" Zaria asked quickly. Marcus glanced toward the rooftop doors as if making sure nobody else had followed him. "Someone has been asking questions about your mother again." The wind seemed to stop entirely around them. Zaria's face lost color. Who? Marcus lowered his voice. "A private investigator from Louisiana came to my apartment yesterday." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Hired by who?" Marcus hesitated. "The Delacroix family." Zaria closed her eyes briefly, like the name itself hurt. Adrian noticed immediately. "That was the family who accused your mother." Zaria nodded slowly. Marcus stepped closer now, urgency growing in his voice. "They reopened the case after one of their former employees admitted somebody tampered with your mother's car before the accident." Adrian's expression hardened completely. "So someone finally decided to tell the truth." Marcus looked directly at Zaria. "The investigator believes your mother did not die accidentally." The words settled across the rooftop, heavier than the cold night air itself. Zaria looked suddenly smaller inside Adrian's oversized jacket. Like grief had physically reduced her. Adrian watched her carefully as tears filled her eyes despite how hard she fought them. And for the first time in years, Adrian Castellano felt something he normally buried before it could exist. Rage born entirely from compassion. For several long seconds, nobody on the rooftop terrace spoke. The wind moved softly around them while Manhattan glowed beneath the night sky. But the world suddenly felt painfully small to Zaria Brooks, smaller than the grief crushing her chest, smaller than the memories she had spent 3 years trying to outrun. Adrian Castellano watched her carefully as she stood frozen inside his oversized jacket, tears gathering silently in her eyes without falling. She looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with long work shifts anymore. This was the exhaustion of someone who had carried fear for too long alone. Marcus Reed lowered his voice gently. "Zaria, I did not come here to scare you." She laughed softly under her breath, the sound trembling. "Then why does it feel like my whole life is about to fall apart again?" Marcus looked heartbroken hearing that, because somebody finally started asking the questions nobody wanted answered before. Adrian remained completely still beside her, but his pale blue eyes sharpened slightly. What exactly did the investigator say? Marcus glanced toward him cautiously before answering. "A former mechanic came forward last week. He admitted somebody paid him to tamper with the brake lines on your mother's car. Zaria shut her eyes briefly, as if hearing the words out loud made the loss real all over again. Adrian noticed her hands shaking immediately. Without thinking, he stepped closer until he stood beside her shoulder, close enough that she could feel warmth through the cold night air. "Did the investigator mention names?" Adrian asked calmly. "Not yet," Marcus answered. "But the Delacroix family is terrified. Somebody reopened the case unofficially." Adrian's expression remained unreadable, yet Marcus visibly shifted beneath his stare. Powerful men understood when another powerful man had already started making decisions internally. "And why are they looking for her now?" Adrian asked quietly. Marcus hesitated again. "Because Zaria's mother kept records." Zaria looked up sharply. What Marcus exhaled slowly. "Your mother knew the Delacroix family lied about the jewelry accusation. Before she died, she wrote down conversations, dates, names. She told me if anything ever happened to her, I needed to protect you." Emotion tightened Zaria's throat instantly. "You never told me that." "Because I thought disappearing was safer." Marcus looked genuinely ashamed now. "I did not know someone would reopen the investigation." Adrian studied Marcus silently for several seconds before asking the question that mattered most. "Where are those records now?" Marcus looked directly at Zaria. "Your mother mailed them to somebody in New York 3 days before she died." Confusion spread across Zaria's face. "Who?" Marcus reached slowly into his coat pocket and removed a worn envelope with softened edges. "You..." Zaria stared at the envelope like it might burn her. Her fingers trembled as she carefully took it from him. The handwriting across the front instantly shattered whatever composure she still had left. Her mother's handwriting, soft southern curves she had not seen in years. Adrian watched the tears finally escape down her cheeks as she traced the faded ink with shaking fingers. "I never got this," she whispered brokenly. Marcus nodded sadly. "Because somebody intercepted your mail after the funeral." The rooftop terrace fell silent again, except for distant city traffic below. Adrian looked down at the envelope in Zaria's hands, then toward the pain overwhelming her face, and something inside him shifted permanently. Not obligation, not curiosity, something deeper, protective in a way he had not allowed himself to feel since losing his mother years ago. Zaria slowly opened the envelope with trembling hands while cold winds swept through the terrace. Inside rested a single folded letter and a small silver key taped carefully beside it. Her breathing caught instantly. "Oh my God." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "What is it?" Zaria looked up at him with tears streaming openly now. "This is the key to my mother's storage locker in Baton Rouge." Marcus nodded once, and according to the investigator, he paused carefully. "Everything proving what really happened to your mother may still be inside." Adrian stared at the small silver key glinting beneath the rooftop lights. Then slowly, very slowly, he looked back toward Zaria Brooks, and for the first time all evening, the most feared man in New York made a decision not as a businessman, not as a strategist, but as a son who still remembered what it felt like to watch the world humiliate the woman who raised him. Zaria Brooks stood beneath the rooftop lights with her mother's letter trembling in her hands, while Manhattan shimmered endlessly behind her like another world entirely. The small silver key rested against her palm, cold and impossibly heavy for something so small. Across from her, Marcus Reed remained silent, allowing her space to breathe through the grief threatening to pull her apart. Adrian Castellano watched her carefully from only a few feet away, his pale blue eyes fixed not on the key, not on the letter, but on the quiet pain written across her face. Slowly, Zaria unfolded the paper, the familiar handwriting blurred instantly through tears she could no longer hold back. "Baby girl," she read softly, her voice trembling beneath the cold October wind. "If you are reading this, then it means the truth finally found its way back to you. Adrian lowered his gaze slightly, recognizing immediately the kind of love hidden inside those words, the kind only mothers left behind. Zaria swallowed hard and continued reading aloud. Do not spend your life shrinking yourself for people who were determined not to see your worth anyway. Your voice was never something to be ashamed of. It sounds like home. It sounds like family. It sounds like me. Tears slipped freely down Zaria's cheeks now. Marcus quietly looked away to give her privacy, but Adrian did not move. He understood too deeply what it meant to hear a mother's voice long after losing her. Zaria's hands shook harder as she continued. The locker contains every document I kept after the Delacroix family accused me. Names, dates, receipts. If anything ever happens to me, promise me you will not let them bury the truth simply because they have more money than us. Her voice cracked completely on the last word. The rooftop terrace fell silent except for distant traffic and the soft rustling of paper in the wind. Adrian looked toward the city skyline, jaw tightening faintly as old memories surfaced inside him again. His own mother coming home exhausted from cleaning rooms, apologizing for things that were never her fault, trying to sound smaller just to survive wealthy people who treated dignity like a privilege instead of a right. Zaria lowered the letter slowly against her chest, tears still falling. She knew. She whispered brokenly. She knew something was wrong before she died. Marcus nodded sadly. I think she was trying to protect you. Adrian finally stepped closer, his voice calm and steady enough to cut through her panic. Then we protect her now. Zaria looked up at him through tears, confused by the certainty in his tone. Adrian's expression remained unreadable, but something powerful had settled behind his eyes now. Not anger, resolve. Tomorrow morning, he said quietly, we are flying to Louisiana. Zaria blinked in shock. What, you are not opening that locker alone? Marcus stared at Adrian carefully. Mr. Castellano, with all respect, this situation could become dangerous politically for someone like you. Adrian finally looked toward him fully. I stopped caring about politics the moment wealthy people decided your friend's mother was disposable. The words settled heavily into the cold night air. Zaria stared at Adrian speechlessly, while wind moved softly through the rooftop terrace around them. Just hours ago, she had been standing in a ballroom trying not to cry while strangers mocked her accent for entertainment. Now the most feared man in New York was offering to help uncover the truth about her mother's death. Adrian noticed her disbelief immediately. His expression softened just slightly as he reached into his coat pocket and removed a neatly folded white handkerchief embroidered with faded initials. My mother gave me this before she died, he said quietly. She used to carry it every day while cleaning hotel rooms. Zaria carefully accepted the cloth with trembling fingers. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and winter air. Adrian looked directly into her eyes then, calm and certain in a way that made the entire world suddenly feel quieter around her. Never apologize for where you come from. Zaria Brooks. His voice lowered softly. The people who mocked your voice tonight would never survive the strength it took to earn it. And standing beneath the Manhattan skyline, wrapped inside a stranger's jacket while holding her mother's final words against her heart, Zaria realized something life-changing in that moment. For the first time in years, someone powerful had looked at her pain and chosen not to look away.